All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. I am joined by, and this sounds crazy to say, Sean, but I'm going to say it. Honestly, one of my favorite writers. I
Oh,
enjoy reading this, and I hope I don't embarrass him by saying this, but this young man's column, his wealth of knowledge when it comes to politics is insane. Like he must eat it up 24/7. I'm talking about none other than Shawn Fleetwood of the Federalist. And if you ever go to the Federalist, I mean, and see his work, it is phenomenal. So, Sean, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show.
it's great to be back. Thank you so much for the kind words.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Okay, so I'm in Florida, and one of the things obviously going on out here, and you've written about it beautifully. You've been an attack dog on this, and I can appreciate Dana Lash. She has been on this like white on rice, if you will. I'm so appreciative of her. And I'm ashamed to say I knew the Republican legislature out here in Florida was whack. I mean, even during the presidential election season, and even when DeSantis was campaigning for the presidency as well, a lot of people, there were a lot of things being said about the Florida legislature and DeSantis and how the Florida legislature was so conservative. And I was like, no, that's simply not true. People don't understand that DeSantis has brought a lot of these guys along kicking and screaming. But we've got a new House Speaker and Daniel Perez. We've got a new Senate leader and Ben Albritton. And then we've got Wilton Simpson, that is an ad commissioner. And these guys were running ads all day long. MAGA this, MAGA that, MAGA that. But what has happened, Sean, and you've written about it, is they tried to sell us a garbage immigration bill. So talk to us about that. It was absolutely insane. They flipped pretty quickly. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, the flip-flops have been really incredible because when DeSantis initially came out calling for a special session to help, enforce Trump's immigration deportation policies, he said, we really need to help the administration. This is our chance to pass really tough immigration laws bills into law. And the legislative leaders, Perez and Alberton, came out with a letter and said, oh, it's premature. And then literally days later, they gavel out of DeSantis' special session, gavel into their own special session, and put forward this immigration bill that they call the Trump Act to make voters believe that it's actually this solid, hardcore pro-Trump legislation. But when you actually read the bill, it's very different, much weaker than what DeSantis was pushing for. A good example of this, I mean, you mentioned Wilton Simpson, the ad commissioner. The bill that was initially put forward by the legislature would have stripped the emergency immigration enforcement powers from the governor, which some people have said is unconstitutional, and given it to the ad commissioner. And you ask yourself, why? Like, why is that even necessary? That would be like stripping immigration enforcement from the president and giving it to the Secretary of Agriculture. It makes no sense whatsoever. And then you start to dig into Wilton Simpson's background, and you find that during his time in the legislature, he was a big pusher for pro-illegal immigration policies. He voted to give in-state tuition to certain illegal immigrants like DACA recipients. He also voted to give them temporary driver's licenses. He's someone who's regularly towed the line of the status quo. And I'm not super familiar with, Florida politics and the lobbying that's going on, but I've heard from influential people in Florida politics, conservative commentators, that the big sugar and the sugar industry is a big lobbying group that is very influential there. And so when you start looking at that and you start looking at, the Secretary of Agriculture, this industry that is reliant on, foreign illegal immigrant labor, it all starts to kind of add up at some point.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head. The sugar industry is a big deal here, and Ron DeSantis battled them earlier on in his administration. But also, there's this move by this trial attorney, ambulance chaser, and one of the best, frankly, in the entire country. And he's a major Democratic donor. You may have heard of John Morgan and Morgan, but a huge law firm, and they have a cannabis push, making weed, basically legalizing recreational marijuana use. And frankly, you had some quote unquote conservatives that were jumping on that bandwagon and playing sound bites from Trump before the election. Trump just flippantly, it sounds good. And they're running them up the wazoo. And we they're pushing it again. They're going to try again in 2026. But I suspect that has something to do with it too. And there's been a lot of corruption, sad to say. And I'm not necessarily saying that these guys are corrupt, but in the past, when it came to the Florida House and Florida Senate, there's been some pretty shady land deals. Let's put it that way. And so just corruption in Tallahassee does not shock me whatsoever. And this is why I'm so glad that you're talking about it, because or you've written about it, because it's so important just in general. Let me ask you this. Do you think DeSantis, I started thinking about this today, Shawn. Again, I'm joined by my guest, Shawn Fleetwood of The Federalist. Make sure you check him out. He writes wonderful, very informative columns. And he is a conservative and he is a fighter. I'm sitting there thinking things. I'll read his column and I'm like, yeah, he hit it spot on. I'm going to pretend like I said it. All right. So anyway, so it's good. It's good stuff. Do you think any way, shape, or form, Shawn, DeSantis, I started thinking about this. Do you think he set them up? I mean, do you think he knew they were going to go this way?
I feel like he must have had a hunch, because he has pushed for immigration enforcement policies in the past. He's gotten some through, but I know that this is, some of the more policies that he's been pushing now is stuff that he's been trying to get through the legislature. And so I think what he saw with the Trump being inaugurated, here's my golden opportunity, my last shot before I'm term limited out of office, to get these policies through and make lasting change for Florida. So I don't necessarily know if he would say set them up, but I think that he really saw the opportunity to get these policies enshrined into law.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I really, the more I think about it, and again, I appreciate you not using the term, but I'm like, I think DeSantis is he's a baller, so to speak. He's a fighter himself. So the more I started thinking about that, I was like, wait a minute. But anyway, it's a good deal nonetheless. In general, Shawn, you've written about this before, and I think that one of the things that we have to be very careful of as conservatives and Republicans, we pay attention to what's happening in Washington, D.C., but not necessarily what's happening in our own backyard, particularly when it's a red state like Florida or Texas, maybe, where you have a legislature that is controlled by the GOP. So you assume everything is going to be hunky-dory. What would you say to that?
Well, I guess I'll quote a friend of mine, Andy Roth. He's the president of the State Freedom Caucus Network. And he likes to say that, we know that there's a swamp in Washington, D.C., but there's also 50 swamps in the 50 state capitals across America. And he's absolutely right. I mean, when you look at a state like Wyoming, Nebraska, the Dakotas, these are states that went double digits for Trump in the past few elections. Republicans control all of these statewide offices, have super majorities in the legislature. We should be having states as red, as California is blue, right? Well, that's not the case. We have these, what I like to say, liberals masquerading as Democrats. They know that they can't get elected with a D next to their name, so they run with an R next to their name.
Or masquerading as Republicans, you mean?
Right. Yeah. Sorry. And they run on our talking points, say, oh, I support Trump, build the wall, rah, rah, rah. And then they get into office and they do the bare minimum. They pass the budget items. They don't really tackle the culture issues unless voters force them to. It's just a complete disaster. And so, yes, it's important to pay attention to what's going on in Washington, D.C. with the presidency and Congress, but it's equally important to pay attention to what's going on in your state and local governments, where you have decisions and policies that more directly impact you as a citizen.
Yeah, and it's amazing that you said liberals masquerading as Republicans, because that's the sense that I've gotten overwhelmingly, whether it's Wilton Simpson, whether it's Daniel Perez, whether it's Ben Albritton. I mean, frankly, I wondered that. I'm just like, are these guys, they just know the talking points. They know the right things to say. They know that they can't get elected otherwise. And so they come right in, say the stuff that we want to hear, tickle our ears. And then all of a sudden they're in office, and then they're undermining our governor, which has by far been, and listen, I thought Rick Scott was good. Compared to DeSantis, I mean, DeSantis is a juggernaut. It's insane to see how they'll just undermine. What I wanted to ask you. Here's what I wanted to ask you. We have a minute left in this segment, if you'll stick with me for another block. But I'd love for you to speak to. Here's something that I'm really concerned about. Florida, Texas legislature, both filled with RINOs. Florida and Texas have huge electoral college points. Speak to that.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to the point that what's happening in these legislatures is not reflective of the will of the people. And that people really need to pay attention to what's going on there, because if you're not holding these officials accountable, they're not going to act on your interests. And I think what we've been seeing here in Florida, and maybe we could talk about Texas after the break, is what's going to happen after DeSantis leaves office in early 2027. That despite all of the massive wins that Donald Trump has made, despite what he's done for the conservative movement as a whole, they refuse to change. They will always fight for the status quo, and they will never, ever enact on the will of their voters unless they're absolutely forced to.
Man, and I love the way you framed it. They fight for the status quo. That is the weirdest, craziest thing to me, but it actually does happen, folks. You guys stay tuned. More with Shawn Fleetwood of the Federalist when we get back. Hey guys, Carl Jackson here for MyPillow, and MyPillow is excited to announce that they're having the first ever mega sale on their overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, you can save over 50% on this season's flannel sheets. The queen size is only $59.98 and the kings are only $69.98. But they sell out fast every year, so be sure to order now. You can also save 30% on their brand new Mike crosses. They're designed in the likeness of the one that Mike has worn every day for over 20 years. They come in men's and women's styles, and they're made right here in the good U.S. of A. Get the 2025 six-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. The initial quantities are extremely low, so get them before they or while they last. And I can't forget to mention the My Pillow. It's just $14.98. So to take advantage of the first ever mega sale, go to mypillow.com, use promo code Carl, or give them a call at 800-858-0263. 800-858-0263 is the number to call in. But wait, remember that $75, the $75 free shipping rule. So, that ship is sailed, because right now for a limited time, every order ships free. That's right. Every order ships free. MyPillow.com, promo code Carl, or give them a call at 800-858-0263. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, I'm joined by my guest, Shawn Fleetwood of The Federalist. He wrote a column that I would encourage you to check out, and it's entitled, "Nobody is Buying the Garbage Immigration Bill Florida Republicans Are Selling." And I want you to read that column in light of what's happening across the United States with Republican state legislators that are, for whatever reason, as Shawn mentioned earlier, they're fighting for the status quo. The same is true in Ohio. It makes no sense to me. Why do you suspect that is, Shawn? I mean, what are we just electing a bunch of Republicans with no spine, with no real conviction? Is it an indictment on us as voters? What's happening?
I think it's a combination of all of them. I think a lot of the establishment kind of RINO GOP officials, they've kind of seen serving as a Republican senator, representative, et cetera, as more of a careerist opportunity for them, more so than a public service to their constituents. And I also think it's reflective of us and our lack of attention to what's going on in these legislatures and state government. Our public officials are a reflection of us. And if we aren't paying attention to what's happening, they're going to get away with the corruption and all of the nonsense that we're seeing being uncovered in the federal government with the Department of Government Efficiency. Look at all the rot that they've been uncovering. That has been allowed to fester because of years of inattention by the American people. I'm not saying it's all of their fault, but I think that when we refuse to pay attention, when we kind of get caught up in our day-to-day lives and, the pleasures of everyday life, we forget what's really important, that being an American isn't just a free ride. We cannot afford to put self-governance on autopilot. We have to actually be citizens engaged in our government. We have to be the moral and religious people that John Adams called us to be. And so I think that when it comes to Republicans and kind of the fecklessness that we're seeing, we have to recognize that unless you want a government that actually works for you, you have to put in the effort to hold these officials accountable. And that means actual accountability, primarying these people out of office, and actually making sure that you're putting forward people that represent you and your values.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the truth there. And freedom is it's an honor to be an American. It's a privilege to be an American, but it's also a great responsibility to be an American. And we can't take this stuff lightly. Now, you don't have to be political nerds, if you will, like myself and Shawn Fleetwood here, but you do have to pay attention. You do need to know who your state legislators are, and you need to know what they're up to, even if you're just checking in here and there to make sure that everything is good. Check their voting records. Even when it comes to national politics, people call themselves conservatives. I go and check out their Liberty score, and I'm like, no, you're not. I mean, it's just give me a break. This is not how this works. But let me just speak to some of the specifics that you mentioned in your column, because I want people to be aware. My concern is I don't want these guys to be able to win higher offices once they move on from the state house, from the state senate. I suspect, and I've had some of my colleagues on air, the American Adversaries, talked about Wilton Simpson and how there's a belief that what he's trying to do and what these state legislators were trying to do is kind of build up his name to be the next governor of Florida. And I'm like, no way, I am not having it. I will do everything in my power. But you mentioned the driver's licenses that he wanted in-state tuition for illegals. Absolutely insane. But more of the things that these people did not want to do. And Shawn, I'm sure you've heard the news. This is flipped. They've capitulated now. I mean, we'll have to wait and see the final bill. But DeSantis and them seem to be gelling together, where DeSantis is apparently going to sign a bill. But their original bill failed to put in an enforceable duty on state and local law enforcement to cooperate with illegal immigration enforcement, basically catch and release. The legislature bill included proposals that needed to, the tuition waivers for illegals. I mean, this is stuff that is just absolutely insane. You would expect that this stuff was coming straight from a Democrat.
Yeah, and they also play games with the language, which tells you everything you really need to know. So in the legislature's original bill, they enacted or tried to enact this state immigration council, which would be made up of appointees from the governor, this chief financial officer, the AG, and several other positions. And basically, the primary purpose of this board was to issue advice to what they would say is the chief immigration officer, being the ag commissioner. But they also created this little provision that DeSantis was really pushing for, which is penalties for local officials who refuse to comply with immigration authorities. And they slipped this in their bill, but instead of mandating it outright, they gave the council the option of creating and making those rules into law. They said you may put these rules forward. So it's not an outright demand and requirement by the law that they do this. They just gave it an option to give it the appearance that, oh yeah, we're really serious about cracking down on illegal immigration and working with local and state and federal officials. But in reality, it's just, the smoke and mirrors.
And it's such an important point. I mean, again, just kind of circling back here, not meaning to be redundant, but this is why it's so important for people to pay attention to their local political officials and to know what's going on, because oftentimes we talk about the left all the time, and they deserve to be talked about. I mean, they deserve to be ragged on and all of that good stuff. And we'll do that in just a second here, as a matter of fact. But sometimes, I mean, these Republicans, in my opinion, they're complicit. They're just as bad as the left. If you don't fight the left, then what are you doing? I mean, we're not dealing with your, uncle's, Democrat Party anymore. Shawn, you talked about Doge. Look at all of the outrage and the pushback from what I perceive to be these activist judges when it comes to Doge. And then you have the Democrat Party that are literally calling out Elon Musk, some calling for violence, because they're exposing corruption. And this is the most insane thing. I wanted to say this is the most insane thing I've seen, but and then we just had a president with dementia for 4 years. So, but anyway, your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, the corruption has persisted because, again, the Republicans have been complicit in this. And we have been complicit in it to some degree because we've allowed the Republicans to be complicit in it. You mentioned the Liberty Score Tracker. Heritage Action also has a scorecard where you can look up your congressman or senator and look at their voting records. And you look at these Republicans who are trying to align themselves with Doge, senators like Joni Ernst from Iowa, who tried to tank Pete Hegseth's Pentagon nomination. And she's out there tying herself to Elon Musk and fighting government corruption. But then you look at her track record and you see her voting for almost every single major spending bill that has been put forward in the Senate, voting for Ukraine aid numerous times, voted for several pieces of legislation, anti-gun rights, anti-marriage proposals. I mean, all of these things that she's voted for just in the past few years. But I think it just goes to show this important message, which is that these Republicans will mask themselves under Trump. They will try to align themselves with Trump. They will try to align themselves with people like Elon Musk. But in reality, they're not your friend. They will say what they need to get elected. And that the minute they get that reelection bid, the minute that they survive that primary, it's back to the status quo. They are going to pull out all the tricks this upcoming 2026 midterm election. You're already starting to see it with people like John Cornyn and Tom Tillis. They're going to they're going to say what they need to in order to get reelected.
Okay, so I was getting ready to go to John Cornyn. I was literally sitting here thinking, Sean, do not forget John Cornyn. And then you mention him. But this is a perfect example. This guy's Liberty score was right around 50. I'm not even sure. He was voting less conservative than some Democrats. And then he comes out with this, we want reciprocity when it comes to the Second Amendment. And then you sit there and you wonder, like, listen, I hope he's genuine. I hope this comes to fruition, but is this what he does just in hopes of getting reelected? And this guy was going to, running to be the Senate Majority Leader.
Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind, just a few years ago in the summer of 2022, he was tasked by Mitch McConnell with working with Senate Democrats to pass gun control legislation that included funding for red flag laws. So, this is the guy who, as you pointed out, was running to be the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. And now he's going around saying, I'm going to vote to confirm all Trump's nominees. Well, that's great. I hope that you do that, considering that you represent the state of Texas. I don't understand why you're telling us that you're doing that. This should just be an expectation that you are working with the Republican president rather than working against him. But again, this is just the type of Republicans that we have. And if we want real systemic change in the Republican Party, you need to get rid of these people at the ballot box. And you're not obviously going to be able to get rid of all of them. But if you can, take a few political scalps, at the ballot box, metaphorically, of course, then I think the rest will fall in line and realize that the people are serious.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And frankly, the fact that these RINOS here have reversed course, at least for now, is a good sign that people are paying attention more than they were. Okay, we got about 30 seconds here, Sean. What does Trump need to do to solidify his legacy, this presidency? Honestly, I believe he's got 2 years.
Yeah, I think that, once the midterms happen, it's just going to be lame duck after that, regardless of what happens. But I think that he really needs to make a really concentrated push to get a lot of these executive actions that he's been taking into reconciliation and get those enshrined into law. Because if they don't, the minute that the next Democrat president comes into office, they're just going to repeal them. So getting those enshrined into law needs to be his biggest priority right now.
All right. Shawn Fleetwood of The Federalist, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you, man. Keep writing.
Thanks so much, sir. God bless.
All right. God bless you.